All right. So the subject of today's discussion is, as you probably already all know, the subject of motivation, and the reason for that, I think, is self-evident. I think Scott, did you have something you wanted to start us off with here?
Yeah, a couple of things. I think that first of all, I want to point out that this 50% sale coupon that we had on the screen while we were waiting to get the meeting started, um, that is a coupon off 50% off for this 7-hour online video course that Steve and I had filmed when we did a presentation or did an all-day seminar in Boulder a few years ago. And so if you're in doubt or if you have questions and if you've read the book or read stuff on the website and still want to dig a little deeper, we go into a lot of rabbit holes during that talk. And so it's a good way. We thought we'd put that on sale right now for people who are trapped at home and maybe looking for something to do. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that we would be that we're pushing that thing a little bit. So if we're ready, I think I would like to maybe start with this quote. We've been starting these meetings with these quotes. This one is by Viktor Frankl, who many of you may have heard of. He was the author of Man's Search for Meaning. The quote is, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. And I think that will set the tone a little bit for today's talk and how we'd like to frame some of the subjects that we're going to go into now. And I'd like to point out that what we're going to talk about today is pretty much it's informed by our own personal experiences and those of the athletes that we work with over many years. So if you've been reading our books or the articles on the website, it's definitely going to come as no surprise to you that we're not going to be offering any sort of quick fixes or, as I'd like to say in the lexicon of our time, hacks there, because we don't really believe there are any hacks to these sorts of motivational questions that we're going to be talking about, and mental strength, that sort of thing. None of these things, just like the training that we prescribe, none of these things are going to be easy. But the fact that you're already in the uphill athlete sphere of influence means that you're probably already looking for challenges in your life and you're willing to suffer to reach some pretty lofty goals. So we're hoping that this will help inspire and inform you. Go ahead, Steve, with your...
Yeah, well, I think I would like to just start off by asking you some questions, Scott. And I mean, this is the fundamental question I think that we kind of need to start with a little bit is definitions. And what is motivation to you, first of all? I mean, we're talking about in the training and the physical preparedness context. How do you define that?
Yeah, well, I'm going to define it with what says on my t-shirt right here, if anybody can read it.
You can't coach desire.
Coach desire. And that's sort of a synopsis of a slogan. And I've used this years ago. I put it on a little hand scribbled poster on the wall of the gym here at the Uphill Athletes World Headquarters. And I think it sort of, the reason we've chosen it as a slogan for Uphill Athlete is that motivation has to come from inside. I can't motivate you. I can't motivate anybody. I mean, I'm lucky when I can motivate myself, but it has to be intrinsic, because if it's extrinsic, if you're relying on someone else to provide that motivation, then the moment that stops, or the moment the race gets canceled, like everybody's events have been canceled this spring and summer, the moment that happens, poof, there goes the motivation. And so the first thing I think it's important for me to, my understanding of motivation is that this intrinsic feeling, this intrinsic drive, this desire, like it says on our t-shirt, the desire that we can't coach. And that requires discipline. And so I think that for me, the motivation starts with the discipline to adhere to a plan, or to keep, especially to keep the long view in mind. Does that answer that, Steve?
Yeah, and I would like to add a couple of observations. And I think that a lot of us, I think back to my early years, even in high school, one of the things that motivated me was when I was running cross country and skiing cross country, doing cross country skiing, is I had two friends, and we were a training group, the three of us essentially, and in a way, it was a form of extrinsic motivation, because I knew they were waiting for me at the park at 9 o'clock in the morning, so I had better get down there, or I was going to have to answer for my absence. So there are a lot of things that go into this, besides, and that's I think what we kind of want to excavate around today, and see what comes up. So I agree, and as you all know, that's kind of the uphill athlete philosophy. We don't try to be cheerleaders, and we don't do a whole lot of rah 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 around here, as you guys all probably know. But people need a little bit of that right now, or at least need a little bit of a reminder of how to appropriately how to keep going. And what the best way to keep going is, and those are the things I want to talk about, because right now, we have a lot of unknowns in front of us, canceled events. We don't know when we're going to be able to go outside again. All these things. So let's talk about that a little bit. So if Scott, you started to talk about discipline and the connection between discipline and motivation, and how do you see that connection, and how does that work, and what's the spectrum of that you see in the athletes?
Before I answer that, Steve, can you go and mute everybody again, because we've got a few people that still have their microphones on.
Okay. Remember how. But go ahead and answer my question while I'm.
We're technologically morons here, so. Okay, so first I'm going to answer a question because I think it relates to your question, Steve. It just came in from Giselle in Boulder. Is how can athletes stay motivated with?
Uh-oh. I muted you, Scott. That's the problem. Okay, Scott, you should be unmuted now. Sorry, I muted everybody, and it muted.
Okay, all right, okay.
Start
anyway,
back.
we got a question. We got a question in from Giselle in Boulder about how to stay motivated during these times. And I think the answer to that is basically what Steve was just alluding to is, and I mentioned, is that motivation has to come from this internal discipline. And it has to come from enjoying the process, that, whether or not you climb that mountain or run that race, the process of getting prepared for that, whatever this event is, and so it doesn't matter whether it's canceled or not, that process becomes the motivation. That process becomes the discipline that you adhere to. And so I guess that what I would like what I think of, and I think many of the pros athletes that we work with, and we're going to discuss this a little more in a few minutes, they have a longer view approach than many amateurs do, in that in some cases, actually, I've had some of the professional athletes I work with say they view this as a bit of a gift, because now they can extend their base training period. They're going to be even fitter when they get when it comes time for whatever the big event is, a climb or a running race. And this allows them more time to focus on those things, because the process for them is as important as the actual end result. I mean, the end result is kind of gravy, but one of the things that I know over the years that, I've worked with Olympians who've spent their entire lives preparing for the Olympics. And certainly in the previous 10 or 15 years, their entire life had been focused on this one race. And then an injury or an illness comes along, and poof, it's gone. I've worked with many alpinists who will go on a climbing trip after having trained again for years, often to prepare for this, end up sitting on a glacier in a tent for weeks. And so when you put yourself in the position of those athletes, what you realize is that they're used to these sort of setbacks. And in order to stay in it for the long haul, you've got to be able to weather setbacks, whether it's bad weather, injury, illness, you name it. There's a million things that can derail our plans. And I think that most of the people that I work with that have been successful in this, it's because the process is the goal in a way. Hope that helps, Giselle.
I would add, from my own experience, that because I'm one of those alpinists who would go and sit on a glacier for weeks and physically feel my fitness slipping away, that I'd worked for a year in a lot of cases to build up. And I think there's a couple of things that go into it. One is like keeping this perspective of thinking about years, or keeping the long term, the 20,000 foot view. If I'm going to go, and those of you that have been following my talks about Masherbrum and K7 and these other peaks that climb like Haji Brak and Kapur Peak in this time period where I've been doing these Zoom talks the last few days, you'll notice that these are actually turned into multi-year projects, essentially, where I'm trying to climb one peak for not just many attempts over a season, but over multiple seasons. And I think that's pretty normal. And what allows me to do that is keeping that longer term viewpoint. So that's one thing. And then, but how do you do that in terms of the day to day? Like, I need to get a workout done today. And especially, how do you do that in times like this that we're in, which are obviously unprecedented in our lifetimes? And for me, it's a couple of things. It always helps me to have this, I wouldn't necessarily say goal. I mean, some people function really well with like, oh, I'm going to climb Denali in June or that kind of thing. My goal was more abstract generally, in that it was, I want to be the best I can be at this thing, which for me was alpinism. For another person, it might be mountain running, skiing, or whatever their sport, whatever your sport is. So I think that's what Scott was saying earlier about the process. That's the process of, and so that's in mind, right? But then what about the day to day, getting back to that? I think one of the things that helps me more than anything is a schedule. Knowing that, and I think that's one of the problems that people are having right now is, Scott and I we work from our homes, and our schedules, we have a schedule around the work we do with Uphill Athlete, for sure. I do. I know Scott does. But a lot of people, you're used to having to be at work at 8 o'clock. And if you don't get there, your boss is going to be mad or whatever. So you've got to adhere to a schedule because you're responsible to other people. So you're in your car at 7:30 and doing your 25-minute commute, and then 5 minutes to find parking and get your coffee and walk upstairs or whatever it is. And that's gone, right? Like for millions of people, that's just around the world, that's just evaporated overnight. And that's a big challenge. So one of the things I think is looking at what you have to do on a day-to-day basis. And for some people, like, actually I could speak for Scott and I, we're Uphill Athlete in a way, our like revenues are less, but we're busier than ever because we're trying to help so many people. And so it's we're having to create look at what we're doing, create a schedule around that. Then the other part of that is getting the people around you on board with that, like your family, if you live in a family unit, however that looks, and then figuring out how to actually do it. And that's something we're going to get into a little bit more later, but I think we have pretty big, and I know from the chat and I know from the emails we've seen, we have people who are literally like in a small apartment in a big urban area, right? There's lots and lots of people I've heard from like that. And then there's other people who, like myself and Scott, where we live in these small mountain towns where we're able to go outside. We're not supposed to be outside like doing a bunch of extreme sports, but we can go for a run outside for an hour and nobody cares. So there's a big variety of things. Some people have a good gym in their garage, some people don't. Obviously public gyms are closed. So Scott, why don't you tell me about that? Like, what are you doing with your athletes that you're coaching right now that are communicating to you that they have, just an apartment and they live on the 5th floor or whatever it is? What are you telling your athletes right now?
Well, some of them have been really creative on their own. Luckily, like Steve said, most of the folks that we're fortunate enough to work with as coached athletes as part of Uphill Athlete are highly motivated. And so very few of them need a kick in the pants to get out the door or need much, mostly they need somebody to hold them back so they don't do too much. But, as an example, one of the people I work with is an ultra runner in South Africa named Anouk Bars. And Anouk is running a marathon in her back garden this weekend. And so far, from what I can see, each lap of this garden takes her a little over a minute. So you can imagine how many laps that's going to take for her to run that distance. And one of our other coaches mentioned one of their athletes who actually ran a marathon on his balcony in Milan, Italy. So people are going to those sorts of extremes. I'm not recommending that that's what everyone has to do, but getting creative, using one of the things that we did immediately when we saw this happening and people getting shut down is we started providing just some filler material, some workouts to follow along with for free on the website. And one of the things I've told many of the folks that I work with over the years, I've had tremendously good experience with this, is using this Uphill Athlete muscular endurance workout that we've written extensively about it. It's all over the website. We've now made it a PDF that you can download from I think it's right on the front page of the website. Steve, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
I'll bring it up.
But that PDF of that workout, it has a 10-week progression of the workout built into it. You need literally no props or equipment at home to do this. And if a person was, in a jail cell, solitary confinement, and they could do this twice a week, I can almost guarantee you that they will come out of that much fitter than they went in. And so if there was one pill that I would prescribe to kind of get people through this as a workout, and a way to sort of satisfy or scratch that exercise itch that we all have, that would be it, is to go to that workout, use it. And, again, you don't need more than about, 2 or 3 meters square and you're good. You got plenty of room. Other than that, most of the folks that I work with are luckily are not in major urban areas and do still have some access to the outdoors, whether or not that is, whether that's, literally being able to go out and run for hours or run around the block or run around their yard. So we're still able to keep a semblance of training going for many of them. For most that don't have gyms, we've switched primarily over to body weight strength training, which is, again, the basis for all of these free workouts that we've been giving away to people since this started. All of them are body weight. And if you're so strong that body weight's not enough, you can put a few books in the backpack and use that. Hopefully we are talking about a temporary situation here and not a permanent derailment of everything we've grown used to. And I think that it's a matter now, what I've been telling, again, some of the pros that there it is, Steve, thanks for putting that up there.
So long.
But Think of this as a maintenance period, perhaps. You might have to drop your training loads down somewhat, but it doesn't have to stop training. And it's not a, it's not the end. It's just, it's a hiatus perhaps from this sort of serious training. Treat it as if you were injured or ill for, with a bad flu for a month or something. Those kind of derailments happen often. And so don't necessarily think about it as the perfect training period. Some people will still be able to train almost uninterruptedly. People that live in areas like where I live, where there's less than one person per square mile in the county I live in. So the virus isn't really affecting us too much yet.
There's a question here, Scott, that I'd like to address that's related, and Patrick wrote, for those of us who may be getting restarted during this time, coming back from an injury in his case, would you recommend focusing energy on the muscle endurance workout or on the Rainier, Denali, Everest circuits, the free workouts that we sent out, or both? My impression was that, which is correct, Patrick, that muscular endurance is typically for later in the training cycle.
Good question, Patrick. Thanks. So yeah, what I was saying was, if you had one workout you could do, that would be my preference for you. But if you're coming back from an injury and you're needing to regain some strength, then yes, start with that Rainier, Denali, Everest progression first, because the muscular endurance program is pretty demanding. I mean, it's only body weight, but it still can be quite demanding for many folks. The thing I like about it is that it has this built-in progression. So it will take you through some of the, it'll take you all the way through a whole 10 weeks. And by the time you get to the end of the 10 weeks, you can even continue. I've had athletes use that for as long as 16 weeks at a time. So I just find it to be a very efficient way to maintain both the aerobic and the strength component of your training. But it is going to be more demanding than those others that we gave away for free as well.
I want to go back real quickly, Scott, to connect a few dots, I think, on the original motivation topic. And one of the things that we both talked about a little bit was this idea of discipline being connected to motivation. And I think it's also that, I talked about the schedule, which is, to me, part of discipline, maintaining a schedule. And for me personally, I find that really, really important. I have young kids, and sometimes they disrupt my schedule, which it makes me really frustrated because it throws everything off, and I have a hard time kind of correcting a day if that happens. So one of the things that having a schedule for me is important. For a lot of people, I think reestablishing a schedule, like I said, now that schedules are kind of thrown out the window for a lot of us, and then the discipline to do something physical and train every day, or as Scott said, if you can only do one, if you only can only motivate for 2 1-hour sessions a week, you do that, and you're physically intact. This is not for injured or recovering from injury or never trained or coming from a lower fitness level. Then for most people, you could do this muscular endurance progression that Scott talked about. Just do that 2 days a week, and get through the next 2 months or whatever this is going to be, and you'll be much better off if you can do that. Than way really better off if you can do that than if you do nothing. So that would be the minimum, sort of the floor where we'd like to see people engaging with their training. If you can do more than that, that's great. And then the other part of that will be, some kind of, more sort of endurance oriented training, whatever that is for you. Is it's running around in your garden or your backyard, or if you can go out for a run. A lot of people are allowed to go out for an hour a day somewhere. So, just even if it's a flat run around town on the streets or whatever. So there are a variety of things. So if I wanted to connect the discipline to the schedule, and the discipline as well to the motivation going forward. And somebody had written a really good question to me about the mental training that I've done, such as mindfulness and meditation. And I think that this is an important topic, and it connects back again, once again, to this idea of discipline, and as Scott stated, the idea of desire. I think that nothing develops mental toughness like getting out the door every day and doing a workout, no matter whether you feel like it or not. Because the reality is, and I had years where I trained as a professional athlete. I didn't really have another job other than just going climbing, training and going climbing. And I can tell you there's a lot of days I didn't feel like it. But I did it for the most part. Or I would, in my case, I would call Scott and bitch a little bit, and then I would feel better, and then I would go do it. And so, if you have a coach, that's always a nice thing you could do. But I think that over the longer term, does build a lot of mental strength in a couple of ways. One of the things is it's just establishing the knowledge that it's sort of, I think a lot of what was the word, mental training is tied to what a lot of us carry around, a lot of self-doubt. I think it's innate, or it doesn't matter if it's born or bred or at this point, but a lot of us carry along a lot of self-doubt, or a lot of feelings of inadequacy and those kinds of feelings. And so those feelings, also kind of feelings of depression and mental illness, and there's a whole continuum there, but a lot of those contribute to a feeling of, I can't do it, I can't go, I don't have the energy, it's not, I just can't do it, which if you don't do it is a self-fulfilling prophecy. But you can turn that, or if you can find the motivation to turn that around and do it, it builds momentum in the other way, which I think is hugely valuable and hugely important. And it has been a major piece of my life for, especially those moments when I really feel like I can't do it. My approach, and I learned this from a friend who went through, who had this basically recommended to him because he was a heavy drinker and went to rehab. And they told him, when you feel the urge just to drink, in his case, try to wait 5 minutes, engage in something else, even if it's just washing the dishes, do something for 5 minutes, and these urges will pass, right? Our emotions change over time. And this is actually an emotional response to something. So engage in something, even if it's just busy work, for a few minutes, then check in with it again. And it's almost always different. And then put your shorts and your socks and your running shoes on and go out the door. And you're going to be able to get there. Where if you sit down in front of the TV with the bowl of chips with the remote control, you just feel worse. And you're also going to carry that feeling of feeling worse into the next day. And if that snowball continues, it gets really, really hard to dig out of it. So don't underestimate the value of small victories. Don't underestimate the value of, taking maybe that suggestion I just made of waiting, doing something else, and then trying again, and pushing through it and getting out the door. And, sometimes, I know, in my experience, I'll come up with excuses. I'll be like, oh, it's too soon after I ate, or, oh shoot, I had that kombucha and it's fizzy and it's going to make my stomach not feel good when I run, or there's a million things, there's a million little excuses I've come up with in my mind for not training. My current one is I have a tread wall in my garage. My tread wall is broken. So it's not really broken, but the brake doesn't work when it hits the bottom. So it just always spins, which is it is actually fairly annoying, but I can also just still climb on it and turn the speed slower so that, it's not actually impossible to climb on it. But that's provided a pretty good excuse a few times in the last couple of weeks. I can tell you all that. So I think working through these things, and then you mentioned somebody asked in their question about the meditation, and I almost see that as as totally separate. And I've talked about that in the past. But my experience, I'll just backtrack. Some of you may not remember from the book. I talked about it in the New Alpinism book, in the mental training chapter. My introduction to meditation came actually from an Eastern philosophy class I took in college. I went to Evergreen State College, which is big on experiential education. It's in Olympia, Washington. And we did a 10-day meditation retreat, of Vipassana meditation retreat. And it's a silent retreat. You're in isolation and silence for 10 days. And it was, at the time, one of the hardest things I had ever done. Talk about a great education in what meditation really means. We sat for 14 hours a day, 10 days in a row, in isolation. You weren't allowed to speak. You weren't even supposed to, like, kind of, you'd see other people, but you weren't supposed to, like, communicate in any way, like look at them or something. And but what was really interesting is I immediately noticed the effect on my life, right? In fact, like, it was after doing that, it was really easy to have the discipline to set up my schedules. I got my studies done, to go do my workouts, to go get my climbing done. My life became, a lot of ways, much easier. Because the monkey mind, as you guys are sometimes familiar with that term, I've referenced that term, was easily quieted. And the monkey mind can also be the excuse, like, oh, my treadwell brake is broken, I'm not going to climb on my treadwell today, and I'm not really excited to go for a run, so therefore I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to sit here in front of this computer and work all day. So without that, with the meditation, it would allow that. And I've found for a long time, I've actually, since my first son was born, it's been really hard. It's been I haven't done any meditation in over 4 years since he came along, because it's been too much for me to get back to that. And that's something I would like to get back to, for sure. But up until that point, I found that it was something I could pretty easily tap into. And I went and I did some other Vipassana shorter sits, 3-day sits, and it was something I could kind of tap into. And it was a really, really powerful tool for me throughout my climbing. And I would recommend it to anyone and I've had multiple people email me that have read about that in the book, or talked to me about that and gone and done the 10-day. And I would, if you've got that time and level of dedication, I would highly recommend it. It's life-changing. But it's not, I know we were talking to Luke Nelson, and I think it was Luke who instigated, I think, just using an app, helping him with it. He instigated what was it, 10 minutes or something a day. And so that's a really good, doesn't have to be an hour every day. It can be just a smaller amount. So I'm sure there's been I haven't been monitoring the thing. Yeah. So I just wanted to go for a run right now. Wait, let's have a beer. Yeah, exactly. So Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Nothing to add about meditation. I've tried and been an utter failure. So it's still on my to-do list. But I do think, something that one of the alpinists that I coach, professional alpinists that I coach, David Gotler, who's German but lives in Spain, brought up something recently to me about how, obviously his big goal this year was to go back to Everest. Some of you that might follow him know that he attempted Everest last year without oxygen and got caught in that terrible traffic jam at the summit last year, had to turn around just a few meters below the summit and go down. And he was planning to go back and try a route to repeat the Barry Bishop route on the West Ridge this year. Of course, that's all completely off. And so we've had to pivot to something new. And so David's goal has pivoted to handstands. He wants to perfect his handstand. And that reminded me, when he mentioned that in 1978, I soloed a big new, what for me was a big new hard route on Denali. And at the end of that trip, I had a bad accident and got pretty badly hurt, and ended up having major surgery on one of my knees, And I was in a full, this back in those days, 1978, orthopedic surgery wasn't what it is today. I spent 6 months in a full-length cast from crotch to toes. Needless to say, I couldn't do much at all with that. And so I shifted to pull-ups, one-arm pull-ups. My goal was to perfect my one-arm pull-up. And it worked. The end of those 6 months, I could do a one-arm pull-up, even with that cast on my leg. And so I think being willing to change your focus and being willing to accept these limitations that are obviously not self-imposed. These are coming from an external source, and we have no control over this. But I think that's another way you can reframe things to make as they say, make lemonade out of lemons. Another question that's come up, Steve, in this is, and I think it relates back to the discipline idea, this notion of how to deal with fear, how to develop the mental toughness, the mental strength, certainly something that you are very well accomplished at. And I want to hear your thoughts on it, but I want to sort of set the stage for that by saying, in my experience in developing this mental strength to deal with fear, whether it's as a climber, fear of falling, or as a runner, whatever, running racer, fear of failure. We all, of course, have fear of failure with that. I think it's what's important to understand is that Steve didn't get up off the couch and climb K7 or the RuPaul face. Those were the end results of years and years of tiny little disciplinary steps that he had taken to get to that point. Just like Alex, we've all been amazed, of course, to watch the movie of Alex Honnold, who's one of the uphill athletes that we coach. We've all been amazed to watch his movie of free solo on El Cap. Alex didn't get off the couch and free solo El Cap. That was the end product of many years and many thousands of hours of focused training and discipline that got him there. And in the process of developing, using these little mini steps, maybe it's getting out the door or getting out of bed, or not eating that extra helping of Oreo cookies or whatever it is. That you got to start with some little step. You don't start with Nanga Parbat or El Cap. You start with some tiny little steps. And I think that over the years of practicing that, discipline and motivation are skills just like the physical skills we talk about all the time. And they require, like any skill, requires practice to get good at. And if you're always avoiding it by saying, oh, well, I can't train today because my tread wall is broken, then you're going to just be avoiding developing that skill. Steve, can you add some things to that?
Yeah. Well, I think I want to just start by, because I know I'm going to go down a bit of a rabbit hole, so excuse me, and it's going to go off topic slightly in terms of the current situation. But I want to start back with connect it back to this current situation, where, Mike Foote had sent me a message about his seeing this as an opportunity to get creative with improving his running and his ski mountaineering. And I think that these kind of things are like, what better time to work on your meditation because we can't go outside anyway. So maybe, for you, like for some of you, that's going to be the thing that you could focus on and get excited about and set some, I don't like to think of that in terms of goals, but set some aspiration to work on, your meditation and mental training during these times, because we can get out some pillows and put them against the wall and sit down and close our eyes and connect to our breathing, which is typically the first steps in meditation. So I think for sure there are some real potential to exploit here for a lot of us. And I should also kind of listen to my own advice. I've been feeling really overwhelmed, not especially when the news got really bad initially, like about 2 weeks ago. and kind of the realization of what was coming was kind of hitting all of us. I mean, I think a lot of us, I was kind of a mess. So I've been purposely disconnecting a little bit more from the news, spending less. Again, I've used my schedule. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna read this for this long, and I'm gonna select what I expose myself to. But so there are some things we can do around the confines of the current situation. For me, when I talk about managing fear, it's connected to this sort of concept of mental toughness. It's interesting. Let me actually not talk about myself for a second. Let me talk about my friend Josh Wharton for a second. And this isn't necessarily related to fear, but it's related to discipline, which is related to managing fear. And I'm not climbing on a super high level, or I'm not, and I haven't trained for years now. And I still like to climb and ski and do the things I like to do, but that isn't all I'm doing. That isn't the most important thing in my life anymore. So I don't have that discipline in my daily life anymore, but sometimes I spend time with my friend Josh Wharton, who is in that space in his life where climbing is the most important thing. And it's really interesting to me when I'm around him in a group, because, for example, he doesn't drink. And he's careful with his diet, and he's very regimented with his training. And when you're in a group, people are often like, they're not, and this is true for, I think, a lot of you that are in training, whether you're on a top level like Josh is or not, where they give him a hard time and they don't understand him. And their reaction is to kind of tease him or make a joke about it or try to actually make him feel bad. And it's interesting to me to watch that because I know exactly what it's like to be Josh, because I remember being in that situation. And so one of the things that we have to do is develop a little bit of armor for that, or tricks. Like, for example, when I was training, and I was also not drinking for years, and I was also not drinking coffee for years, which is a big part of our culture. I had to have workarounds. Like when I went out, I would just I would bring I would if I was at a bar or something, I would just ask the bartender for tonic and lemon or tonic and lime, and it looks like you have a cocktail, right? But it's just tonic water, piece of lime, and some ice. And everybody thinks you're drinking like a vodka tonic or gin and tonic. And if they ask me, sometimes I would actually lie to them, like, "Oh yeah, I have a gin and tonic." Nobody ever tasted my drink, but I needed a prop, right? And it's the same thing with the coffee. You've got, you need, oh, okay, I got my tea or whatever. So, I mean, this is, you develop these little kind of workarounds of these sort of shields to help you fulfill. But to go back to the discipline, it wasn't hard for me. I didn't crave beer. I didn't crave the getting, loosening up with a couple drinks with my friends, because that was not the most important thing to me. So I think where I'm going with this is you have to define for yourself, and you have to get clear on your priorities and what is the most important thing for you. And to me, it actually helps to write them down and rank them. And they change. And also, I think that's an important thing to acknowledge that maybe what is important for you today isn't going to be important for you 10 years from now. You don't have to relive the rest of your life like a monk. But if climbing Everest next year is the most important thing for you at this time, then some decisions need to fall out of that. And that really has helped me with my discipline. And I can see that both from my own experiences, and I see that, manifested by, for example, hanging out with Josh and the example I gave. So how does that relate to managing fear? Well, it relates because it's all part of discipline. Once you have your priorities set and know what's important to you, then things start to fall out of that. And it doesn't become important to me anymore to loosen up with a few drinks with my friends, not because my friends aren't important, because it's more important to me that I have maximum recovery so I can have a good workout the next day. And I know that's important so that I can have the good workout the following day and the following day. And that goes back to what we talked about earlier, is having this 20,000 foot view of what your goal is in a little bit longer term. One of the problems I think to connect it back to right now, to connect it back to today and the crisis we're in with this coronavirus, is it's really easy to get sucked into the looking at the day to day. It's we have this incredibly horrible news cycle right now, with thousands of people are dying all around the world every day, and it's only going to get worse in these next couple of weeks. There's some real heavy stuff. So it's really easy to get pulled into that, and then you lose that perspective really quick. So having that perspective of looking at, doesn't have to be years or decades, but a longer term, if you're, I think for a lot of us, it's appropriate because our events, our races for whatever whether it's in June or July, those are probably off the table. So looking ahead, like, is there something that's going to be in the fall, a race that I can sign up for? Maybe I'm going to try skimo racing and I haven't given that a full go, and that I can work on. And then kind of reset your timeline and identify some new projects, and then take all these tools that we've been talking about and get through these next 8 to 12, hopefully that's all it is, maybe it's a little more, weeks, as best you can. And if that as best you can means that you are going to just do Scott's muscular endurance workout that's there on the site 2 days a week, and that's what you can do, then accept that, be at peace with that, and do that. And I'm gonna go back to the risk here now. How does risk connect to all of this? One of the things that I think is really important to understand, we are as a species really bad at assessing risk. One of the ways that we're really bad at assessing risk is we overweight the wrong things oftentimes. So for example, I'm going to use avalanches for an example because I think that's a great analogy. Right now in my backyard here in Southwest Colorado, we have a generally pretty good snowpack. Like it's pretty stable. But there are certain spots and certain conditions where if you ski in the wrong place on the wrong time of day, you're going to trigger a really big avalanche. It's probably going to take out the entire season snowpack, and it's likely to be resulting in serious injuries or fatalities. There's really, it's kind of binary right now. You're either going to be in an avalanche and you're going to get really badly hurt, or you're going to die, or there's going to be no sign of avalanche, right? So what people I've noticed are doing is people are just skiing. They're not seeing avalanches, so they're just skiing more and more and more. It's particularly worrisome given the COVID-19 crisis we're in right now. So that's we're trying to encourage people to back off and not do that. But this shows the bias is for more recent events. Like I didn't trigger an avalanche on the next run. That means I'm not going to trigger an avalanche on the following run. And they stop thinking that about these particular scenarios that could set them up for a tragic situation. So when you come to evaluating risk, that's really important to remember that we're really bad at it. So what I look for often when I'm evaluating risk is immediate feedback. I try not to think about what happened even 5 minutes ago necessarily. What I'm trying to think about is, I'm trying to think about two things. One, I'm trying to think about macro trends around me, which what I mean by that is, like, is the day getting warmer and therefore the likelihood of rockfall is increasing, okay? I try to think about sheltering in place, to use a catchphrase of the day, where like I'm using the terrain in the mountain. I'm speaking as a mountaineer and as an alpinist, using the terrain to provide the maximum safety, whether that's placing a belay station under a roof, which may be a little uncomfortable because I'm in a hanging belay station rather than on the ledge in the middle of in the couloir, but there I'm exposed to things falling down. Making these kinds of decisions, it's, when we talk about driving, right? When we teach people to drive, we talk about driving defensively. It's the same idea, climbing defensively in that sense. And then I'm thinking about the immediate feedback I'm getting. And the immediate feedback I'm getting has to do with, how does my ice tool feel in the ice? How is that set? Are there fractures around where I placed it? Is it in a good spot? Is it on a bulge? what is my foothold like? Is the foothold sandy? Is the foothold clean? Is it in cut? Is it a smear? How secure am I on that? How well versed am I on using that type of foothold? Am I an expert? You know, if I'm Alex Honnold, like I'm an expert in smearing on granite in Yosemite. You put me up there, I'm horrible at smearing on Yosemite granite. I find it terrifying and really insecure. So in that situation, I'm going to evaluate my immediate feedback differently than another person would. Same thing with ice climbing or mixed climbing. Like if I'm placing my crampons on rock edges, it's all these questions and I'm constantly evaluating all this immediate feedback. How that deals with, how does that have to do with fear? Because that's feeding my fear gauge. Am I afraid because I may be in those kinds of, because I'm not good at that? Or because I don't know exactly what to do for those set of moves? Or do I feel okay? You know, I'm much more comfortable because I'm an alpinist and that's what I've spent a lot of time on. I'm much more comfortable in an climbing alpine type terrain with runouts or without a rope or those kinds of dangerous situations than I would be ever soloing in Yosemite. Like I would never go like, I could never like compete for a speed record on the nose and do simul climbing on the nose because I'm really scared and feel really insecure on that type of climbing. But Tommy Caldwell would be really scared and insecure on the kind of climbing that I'm good at, you know, in the alpine environment. And that's okay. But what I'm talking about there, this comparison is an example, but the immediate feedback that's personal to you, that's really, really important. So I think that's one of the ways that informs the fear gauge. And then the other thing you have to ask yourself all the time is how accurate is that? How well am I judging that? And you have to ask that in a way a questioning way. So and you have to be afraid or willing to be wrong on that and say, okay, I'm out of my element. I'm not very good at evaluating this, so this is not where I should. In a risky situation, is not where I should be learning this skill. You're not going to go up for your first trip to Alaska and climb the Slovak Direct. It's not going to happen. It's going to be inappropriate.
Can I tell you something?
Who's talking?
It's me, Jason. Can I ask you something? Can I tell you something?
Jason, can you put your comment in the chat?
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
I have an important question. I'm scared of working out because my tummy's big.
Okay, can I ask everybody to just keep their comments in the chat, please? And if you don't care, you're welcome to leave. That's absolutely fine, but I believe there are people.
Fuck niggas, I don't trust niggas. If you about to turn I tell you to fuck me.
Okay, how do I deal with this?
Okay. I think we're going to be wrapping up here pretty soon, but I'd like to read a quote.
Well, hold on one second, Scott.
What's that?
Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, hold on!
Dude, oh my God.
Steve, I have a question. What's the best way to get exercise when you're on quarantine?
You don't. Hello, class. Today we are learning about, working out.
I am scared of older men.
Steve, can I ask a question, please?
Steve, what are you wearing? Your shirt looks a little too small.
Okay. Scott, are you there? I think that
I am. Yep, I'm here.
Okay, so yes, apologies for that. I don't know what the point of that is, but legitimate questions, please put in the chat. That's why the chat is there. So I lost my thread there. I forgot where I was. But I do think that this question of fear is an important one, and that's why I was trying to spend some time on it and trying to put it in context for people, as Scott did with saying that it's not something you just are born with or go out and do. It's a gradual process. So I would like to say, somebody asked about working out in a quarantine, and that's what we talked about. Use that muscular endurance workout. But I think that this is there's some. Scott, did you have anything else you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, I think that I wanted to maybe wrap up with a quote from one of the athletes that I got recently. And that is from Luke Nelson. And so Luke sent me an email regarding this stuff, and he said we could definitely share with people if we'd like. Sorry for all the spam we're getting on here. I don't understand why people do that kind of thing, but anyway. So Luke had this email that he sent and asked if I would be willing to read it. And it is that during a phone conversation with my coach, Scott Johnston, the question of motivation was discussed. We talked about what we observed on social media and elsewhere, that athletes had been reacting in various ways, some completely abandoning training, others no longer had the desire to do the hard work. What's the point, many asked, if there's no race or no summit to chase? So runners and climbers alike have been bemoaning the loss of their goals. Many took to social media to express the remorse for all the work they'd been doing that was now seemed to be for nothing, now that their target or their goal had been removed. Over the following weeks, that phone conversation was on my mind, and I often thought of my own motivation. I, like many others, had an event canceled. I had already put in, and he had put in, probably his best block of training ever in the 5 years I've been coaching Luke. And yet when it was canceled, he didn't feel like anything was lost. Of course, I would love to have towed the line, to have gauged the fitness and to have experienced the test, but I had no regret. My desire was to simply continue to work on the craft that I've chosen to dedicate a significant portion of my life to. I did not miss out or waste training simply because I couldn't race. I had made a better version of myself, and I simply engaged in that process. While listening to a recent podcast, one of the hosts asked, are we trying to be an action or a result? This struck me as the core of motivation. Am I trying to be the best version of myself, not whether it's in a place in a race or getting to a summit? Certainly, goals along the path can help gauge progress, but for me, they do not define it. It boils down to training as more of the continuous process of improvement as opposed to training as a step to a goal. I think that's where a lot of athletes got hung up with the cancellations associated with the virus. They only trained as a means to an objective and not as a never-ending process of improvement and adaptation. Sure, it's disappointing that an event didn't happen, but the training was not wasted when seen from that perspective. Why do you practice the craft of moving in the mountains or running on trails? What is it that gets you on a treadmill, to run intervals when you're forced to shelter in place? I know that for me, the motivation lies in the process, the constant, relentless pursuit of improvement. I choose to be action, not a result. I think that's really a good summation of a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. And again, I'm sorry for the fact that this has gotten hacked and that we have people that are, I guess, just bored at home and need something to do.
Yeah, I'm trying to deal with it as best we can. So I think that we should maybe close there. It's been a good session.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to. Sorry about that, everybody.
Really appreciate everyone's patience and attention. And it's been great. So with that, we're going to end the meeting. And thanks all of you for showing up and being here. Really appreciate it.
All right, signing out. Thanks.